Hi, and welcome to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 270, and today's date is January 22nd, 2014. And the title of this episode is, Are Currencies Going to be Reset in 2014? And we're going to get into that a little later in this report. But before I get started, for those people who are trying to reach the x22report.com site, might have noticed that there were some type of problems. You might have received a 403 error, and there were problems on the site. The host was looking into it. They were saying resources are all being used up, and they found something in the database or something, and they said they fixed it, and we should be okay now. And that was the problem that we were having this afternoon. Some people might not even noticed anything, and some people might have noticed it. It was intermittent going on throughout the whole day. Let's get into the economic collapse news, and we understand out in Europe they are teetering on a depression. Of course, all the officials out there, the government officials, the Eurozone officials are telling us they are in a recovery and everything is fine. But if we look at the unemployment is horrific. Spain's unemployment rate stayed above 25% in 2013. It stayed there for 6 quarters in a row. There is a problem. It is not getting better, and if you look further, the youth unemployment is near 58% in Spain. More than half of the youth in Spain are out of work. This problem cannot get better with all of these people out of work. The only way to make it better is to all of a sudden open up tons of jobs and have everyone go and make a good living. And you know that's not going to happen. It just doesn't work that way. And as we know, in Spain, in Greece, and also in Italy, the bad loans are hitting record highs, and we're looking that Italy right now, their bad loans have hit record highs of 23%, and the Italian yields at almost 7-year lows. It is perhaps surprising to some that the Italian bad loan rates are at their highest on record. Bank clients with bad loans have more than doubled since 2008. Things are getting really bad in Europe, and it's happening here in the United States. I mean, yesterday I reported on a Wall Street exec figured out the unemployment, and he was saying, no, the real employment is around 37%. I'm looking at shadow stats. He's saying it's around 25%, and then someone else did a calculation, and it's around 30%. Of course, the government and the Fed are out there saying that the unemployment is 6.7% because, of course, they changed all the calculations, and they need to do this to make it look like things are okay. They need to keep the illusion that the market is okay, the economy is okay, and they need to do this until the very last second. So we understand that all the private Western central banks are in trouble. And what do? They go out and they tax the people because they can't find the revenue any other place to pay the high interest on the debts. They keep the interest rates very low. They keep the gold suppressed, and they keep smacking it down so no one will look at it and say, hey, why is gold rising? Is there a problem? And they keep the markets up high. And right now, just like every single other country, they have created the bail-in documents all throughout the Eurozone, in Switzerland, in Australia, in Canada, in England, and in the United States. And right now, Japan says, listen, we are strapped for money, for cash. We need to go find some more. So Japan is planning to raid dormant bank accounts to raise new revenue. The ruling Liberal Democratic Party is planning to submit a bill to allow the government to access bank accounts that have not been touched for over 10 years or more. Accounts holding some 85 billion yen are classified as dormant each year. And again, the plan is for the funds from the dormant accounts to be transferred to the government-run Deposit Insurance Corporation of Japan. So we can see what they're doing right now. They are getting ready to raid the people's money in the banks. And we will probably see this spread all across the Eurozone and into the United States, because this is what happens when governments become desperate. They end up raiding the Social Security tills, just like Spain is doing right now, and the United States already did it, and they replace it, with treasury bonds or, some IOUs that they stick there and say, oh yeah, well, we owe you this later on. And we can see how this happens, and it just continually going on and on and on, because these governments cannot sustain the debt. They cannot pay, and they cannot get the revenue to pay the interest on the debt and to keep all the programs going in the country. So they resort to other methods, and this is one of them. Taxes are another. Now, I understand that the U.S., the Fed, they're eventually going to come out and tell us that the unemployment rate has gone down again because, all those people that were getting the unemployment extension benefits that ran out in December. So you have about 1.3 million people who are not going to get unemployment, and they're going to fall off, and they're not going to be counted anymore. And as we go throughout this whole entire year, more and more people are going to fall off, and they will not be counted. And the unemployment rate will continually come down. But when you really look to see what is happening out there, we're seeing companies are laying off. Yesterday I said Intel is laying off 5,000 people. Well, Texas Instruments, they're laying off 1,100 people. Target, they decided to cut 475 jobs. And remember, JCPenney cutting 2,500 jobs, Macy's cutting 2,000 jobs. They both are closing stores. And coming up soon, IBM already announced they will be cutting jobs. Heritage Homes is planning layoffs, and we'll get those numbers as they come in. These companies are laying off more and more people. And, they will go on to unemployment for, I don't know, what is it, like 6 months or whatever. They get a certain amount of money. They will eventually fall off because there's no extension, and the unemployment rate will come down. It makes no sense whatsoever the way they calculate unemployment. Really, if you really think about it, all these layoffs and everything are continually coming, thousands upon thousands of people being laid off, and unemployment is continually coming down. Now, we understand all across the nation and that we have a constitutional free zone which wraps around the country. It's 100 miles in from any other nation in the United States or from the ocean. And we can see that our rights are being chipped away, and they're trying to take away a lot of our rights. And right now, college campuses have no free speech zones. A majority of the U.S. institutions of higher learning enforce rules that severely restrict free speech on campus. Now, I remember that college was supposed to be a place of free thinking. You speak your mind. You're allowed to have protests to show, it was a way of thinking, and it seems like colleges are no longer like that. They don't want you to have the freedom to speak your mind, to think, to say, you know what, I don't agree with the government. And right now, 59% of U.S. colleges and universities received a red light, meaning that schools endorse policies that the watchdog group says impede on First Amendment rights. Out of the 427 schools surveyed in the report, about 1 out of every 6 enforced free speech zones. Hey, the United States government also has free speech zones. You just can't go out there and speak your mind because there are certain areas where you're allowed to do it and other places you can't. There's also a law that says you can't protest if there's a government official within like 100 feet of you or so, and even if you don't know that they're there, you still can't protest in that area. So you can see what is happening today in America. They are trying to remove the Constitution. This is their plan. Now, we understand Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act, was really designed to bring in tax revenue. It was really designed to bring in revenue for the insurance companies. It was not designed to help the people. And everyone, in the beginning, everyone's like, oh, rah, rah, let's go health insurance. And, we'll get all those uninsured people insured now. But I hate to say it, most of the people who are uninsured, the reason for it is that it's too expensive. You just can't afford it. And when you get the cheaper policies, you're paying a $200-300 premium. I think that's for one person. Plus, you have to take a high deductible, so it's still coming out of your pocket. And I don't think these government officials realized that was the real problem here. It wasn't that nobody wanted it; they couldn't afford it. And now with the Affordable Care Act, it really didn't make it cheaper for people. It made it actually worse. And what's happening now is that each company is saying, guess what? I know you work here and we've been insuring your spouse, or you work here and you're part-time, but we're no longer going to insure you. And the Aetna CEO right now is saying, listen, from all the information that we've been receiving, only 11% of those signed up for insurance under the law were previously uninsured. Well, again, if the youth unemployment is between 30, 40, or 50%, depending on what numbers you go with, they don't have jobs. So guess what? They're not buying insurance. People who are underemployed, who have 2, 3 part-time jobs, can't afford health insurance. What are they doing? They're paying their rent. They're using their money for food. They're buying clothes. They're buying fuel for their car to get to work. That is it. They're doing the bare minimum. Those people who are working for companies like Target, Home Depot, Forever 21, and they've been working part-time, and some of these companies have insurance for part-time employees. A lot of these companies are saying, listen, we're no longer going to insure you. You're going to have to go to the exchanges. And of course, you know why these people took insurance. Because they had to lay out a little bit of their money, or maybe sometimes none at all. Now when they go to the exchanges, they will need to pay. And guess what's going to happen? Most of them are not going to do it. And right now, Target said it will end health insurance for part-time employees, joining Trader Joe's, Home Depot, and many other retailers. Target's part-time employees, defined as those working fewer than 30 hours a week, use the company's health plans now, and they are no longer going to supply that. They're saying go off and go to the Affordable Care Act. Home Depot has said, listen, we understand that we're giving health insurance for the employee, but they're thinking about, and I think they went ahead with it, saying that the spouse of the employee can go to the exchange and get health insurance. And this is not a system that is going to work. Most of the people are going to opt out of it, and if you opt out of anything, guess what? You're penalized with a tax. People right now rather be penalized with the tax than pay these hefty premiums every single month, which they cannot afford. Okay, now we understand that the Ukraine decided to go with Russia. They decided not to go with the EU because they looked at the EU and the central bankers and they said, wait a minute, Eurozone is in a huge amount of trouble. Let's see, Greece has, 30% unemployment. Cyprus has, 15% unemployment. Spain has 25% unemployment. France has 20-something% unemployment. This doesn't look good, and look how much debt they have. So they decided to go with Russia, and they signed the deal with them. And all of a sudden, we had riots break out all over the place. And these are backed by the private Western central bankers. McCain was over there. And again, I've said this many times, those countries that are not on the private Western central bank and not using the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency or the EU, all of a sudden they are the enemies of the central bankers. And right now, the Greece finance minister, foreign minister, was out there saying that he believes that Russia saved Ukraine from a financial catastrophe by buying Ukrainian bonds. And Russia and Ukraine have now have come very close to forming a gas consortium, and it looks like what's going to happen here is that Russia and the Ukrainian gas consortium will most likely introduce lower prices for Russian gas in the Ukraine. And guess what? They're bypassing the dollar. They're bypassing the EU. And this is why you're seeing the riots in Ukraine. And we're seeing the opposite thing happen in Thailand, where the private Western Central Bank, U.S. government, has a puppet government in Thailand, and the protesters are saying we want the U.S. government central bankers out of our country. So we have the opposite thing happening there, and we do have all this happening in the Middle East, where I explained this many, many times before. Now, we understand that World War III is pretty much knocking at our door right now. All countries are getting ready. They are moving their military assets. They're creating missile shields across the country, from Poland to Romania. The U.S. has a missile shield. Russia has implemented their missile shield. We're putting missiles in Guam. We're moving our base in Okinawa to a new base so we can bring in more sophisticated weapons in Japan. Japan is changing their constitution, and so they can declare war. They've created the first world warship since World War II, and we can see that this is, getting pretty much ready for World War III. And these countries, Russia, China, North Korea, they all realize what is happening. They realize the central bankers will go down kicking and screaming, and they will start a war to cover up this collapse. And India right now is getting prepared also. The Indian Navy deployed their first built nuclear-powered submarine, and they are getting prepared for this. Russians have assisted in designing it, and last year India became only the 5th country to have successfully developed its first submarine-launched ballistic missile. And there are only 4 other countries besides India that can do this, and that is the U.S., Russia, France, China, and the UK have the capability to launch submarine-based ballistic missile strikes. So we can see they have joined the other 4 nations, and all nations are getting prepared for what is coming. And right now we are in so many wars. It is unbelievable. We're in wars all throughout the Middle East. In Africa, there's a verbal war between Japan and China and the U.S. in the Pacific. We understand that President Obama, the Obama administration, has been doing the pivot to Asia and bringing all the assets over to the Pacific. They have 60% of their nuclear submarines over there. Out of the, I think it was the 10 aircraft carriers, 9 of them are 9 of them are out in the Pacific. So we can see what is happening right now. They are all moving these military assets, getting prepared for what is coming. And we can see the U.S. and the central bankers are always provoking those countries that do not have a private Western central bank. Now, Beijing is out there saying, whoa, whoa, we understand that, Japan is changing their constitution, and they're saying they like to act if on something and go to war. And Japan's path is a major concern to Asia's peace, stability, and development. A spokesman from Beijing said that they are really ramping up what could turn into a huge conflict. Now, Japan, on the other hand, is out there saying that it appeals to the world to restrain military expansion in Asia or risk a regional conflict with catastrophic economic consequences. We must restrain military expansion in Asia, and they're talking about China. If peace and stability were shaken in Asia, the knock-on effect for the entire world would be enormous. So here we are, they're going at each other, and they are definitely building the scenario for World War III. They are provoking each other, and this is what the central bankers want, because this is how it gets started. Now, we understand that the Geneva II peace talks are going on with Syria, and it's just very interesting. Right before this took place, all of a sudden, the reports come out that Assad is being brought up on war crimes, and they're bringing all these reports to light. And of course, this whole purpose of this Geneva II is to remove Assad from government. And this was the plan all along. And this is also the plan for Iran. But they're using a different tactic right now. They are trying to get their natural resources to be sold on the U.S. dollar. And right now in Syria, their plan is to remove Assad. And that was the plan all along. It wasn't because, they tried the false flag attack on Syria. That didn't go, and they wanted to bring troops in there because they had CENTCOM. There was a base in Jordan that was sent set up. It was underground. That was the main station to command what was going on. They had Marine troops ready. They had all the warships sitting outside of Syria because they were going to make a move, just like they did in Libya, Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, and remove Assad from government, and then put in a private Western central bank and sell their natural resources using the U.S. dollar. And right now, Kerry is out there saying the U.S. insists Syria's Assad is illegitimate and must be ousted. The United States has insisted for years that Syrian President Assad has lost all legitimacy to lead his people. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said Wednesday that Assad will not be part of that transitional government. There is no way, not possible in the imagination, that man who has led the brutal response to his own people could regain legitimacy to govern. And you really have to think about it. Why would he do this to his own people who support him? It makes no sense whatsoever. It didn't make sense back when the chemical weapon fiasco went on, because he invited, along with Russia, the UN chemical inspectors into the country. And the same day or the next day after that, all of a sudden there was a chemical weapon attack. You wouldn't invite the UN chemical inspectors into the country and then create an incident using chemical weapons. It makes no sense. And of course, the U.S. government for years with Saudi Arabia and Israel had been building up the rebel force. The CIA has been helping. They've been funding. They created the Al-Qaeda group. They created the rebels. They've been paying them, and they've been at this war for a very long time trying to remove Assad. When that didn't work, and over, I think it was 2 years, it just didn't work, they had to resort to that false flag event, and now they're trying a different tactic. Don't be surprised if there is an event on American soils. And when I say that, a false flag event created by the FBI, the CIA, of course the U.S. government, it will happen eventually, because they need to keep this going, because they are losing ground in the Middle East. The Al-Qaeda rebel forces, which are the people of these countries, are much stronger than they thought. They have the will to take back their country. And when this happens, and I've said this many times, the dollar is in really big trouble. It's in big trouble now, but it will be in bigger trouble because other countries will not need it. And now an Iranian commander is out there, and he's saying, Syria needs to be alert not to fall into a trap. And again, this is from the Revolutionary Guard, who's overlooking Rouhani very carefully in how they deal with the United States. And he goes on to say that the U.S. and its terrorist allies were turning to political means in order to compensate for failing to topple the Syrian regime, and urge Damascus to prepare and not trust the other side at the talks, because we know what is happening here. We understand they need to remove Assad from government and put in a puppet regime. So of course Russia comes out and says, listen, we took care of your chemical weapon problem, and we're going to take care of another problem that you have. During the elections in Syria, the Russian government is ready to act as international monitors in the upcoming presidential elections in Syria. Now, of course, the United States hasn't responded to this, and we will have to see what happens. But you can see that the people in Syria, the Russian government, are looking to keep the central bankers' hands out of the election process, because you know what they will do. They will rig it. They will rig it to get a puppet regime in there. This is their plan. Now again, if Russia is going to oversee this, this is a problem. And the only way to move this forward is with a false flag event. And I've mentioned this many times, that CNN reported that they have intel that Assad has a cache of chemical weapons, and it was hidden from the UN inspectors. I wouldn't be surprised if those weapons are already in the United States, just sitting there waiting for the false flag event to occur. Now, there's another report out there saying that Iran's sanctions relief could fund terrorism against the U.S. Iran has been granted absolute control over more than $4 billion that will be unfrozen and returned to Tehran under the recently enacted nuclear accord, causing concern that cash will be used to fund terrorism. The U.S. government cannot ensure that it will not go toward terrorism. The U.S. State Department has designated Iran as the world's most active state sponsor of terrorism. Really? Well, if you really look at what the United States does, is they pay these al-Qaeda mercenaries in Syria to create a war and terror in Syria. You've seen the photos of these al-Qaeda paid mercenaries decapitating people, ripping people's hearts out. They're the ones who did the chemical attack on the Syrian people. So, I mean, then we look at Iran. What state-sponsored terrorism have they done at this time? Actually, pretty much none. So, when they come out and say these things, most of it is false. They've said that Iran is going to have a nuclear weapon in 3 to 5 months. They've said this for 30 months, over and over and over, and still no nuclear weapon. Now, we understand that the FBI right now is in Sochi. The United States has given us huge amounts of warnings about terrorist attacks that are going to occur. And right now, there is another terror alert for a high-speed train carrying tourists into Sochi Winter Olympics. A high-speed double-decker train carrying thousands of tourists from Moscow to Sochi could be used for the next target for a devastating terror attack. A security expert at the New York University said the 1,000-mile Moscow to Adler railway line is vulnerable to a strike by extremists. And we have to remember, the U.S. already has warships in the Black Sea. They've already created this type of evacuation plan. They are getting prepared and ready for something to happen. And what they're saying about the intelligence within Russia is that there is no intelligence from inside the groups. They are almost impossible to infiltrate. They recruit from friends or family. It's hard to predict what is likely to happen. That is the problem Russia has got right now. And this is what the U.S. security expert is saying at this time. Now, of course, Israel is really playing this up because now they're out there saying that they foiled an al-Qaeda plan on a U.S. embassy inside Israel. And this goes on to say that Israel's internal security agency says it has foiled an al-Qaeda plan to attack the U.S. embassy in Tel Aviv and hit other targets in the country. Just right before the Olympics, they're letting everyone know that they stopped al-Qaeda because al-Qaeda is the biggest threat. It said that 2 men, one from Jerusalem and one from the West Bank, were recruited by an operative based in Gaza Strip who worked for al-Qaeda, and they stopped them. And it said al-Qaeda has also planned to send foreign militants to attack the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv on the same day using explosives supplied by the Palestinians. And they said also that al-Qaeda, meanwhile, the sources say, has not abandoned the plot of future terrorist attacks in Europe and the U.S. on a scale of the 9/11 attack. And if we just take a look at what they're doing here, they are paving the road for the next event to occur. And you can see they are continually building this up, letting everyone understand that this is a problem. We got Black Widow running around in Russia. They thwarted an attack in Israel. And they just continually, they had the travel advisory for terrorism, that people flying into Sochi have to be very careful. They have plans to evacuate people. They are just building the propaganda because they realize that the dollar is in big trouble. The economy is in big trouble at this point. Now, we have to look at all the indicators that are going on here, and the question is there going to be a reset because the dollar is losing its reserve status at this point? It has lost the currency wars, and now it is having major problems in Africa and the Middle East. It lost out in the Ukraine, and it is having problems in Thailand. And we can see Russia has already started making deals with every single country out there. And yes, they reported that the yuan is going to be pegged to gold right now. And again, the United States has no gold. And of course, former Assistant Treasury Secretary Paul Craig Roberts is out there saying that they don't have any gold, and this is why they couldn't return the gold to Germany. They didn't have it. And you have to think back and remember, when Germany asked for the gold, it must have been a day or two. France, which was holding the gold for Germany also, all of a sudden had to invade Mali, which is the third largest gold producer in the world. It's just amazing, and the timing of how this happened. And of course, when Germany asked for the gold back, the Fed said, no, we're not going to give it to you. And what we can give you is, a little bit, maybe 5 tons of the 1,500 tons they were holding. And we can see, and there are some reports that they have given gold back to Germany, and some of it wasn't even theirs. It was remelted. The serial numbers are gone. It wasn't 0.99999 fine gold. It was like 90% at this point, and there were major, major problems. And, it just... the whole entire thing is completely falling apart. We see J.P. Morgan getting out of the commodity market, Goldman Sachs getting out of the commodity market. We see all of this happening all at once. And again, Dr. Jim Willey was out there, and he is saying right now that, these major economic events are taking place, and these events are going to shape the financial system in 2014. And we can see that China right now is really beefing up the yuan. They're selling their oil using the yuan. Many of the countries are bypassing the dollar right now and using other currencies and not the dollar. And the Middle East is in shambles. The people are rising up, and they are pushing forward, and the situation out there is getting worse and worse, and they're taking more and more cities in these countries, and the U.S. central bankers are losing ground. This is an indicator that we are having major problems, and the shockwave from this is going to reset the currency across the world, and each currency is going to be will be revalued higher or lower depending on the wealth and the economy of every single country. So right now, Dr. Jim Willey is saying that the biggest shock waves will come from the currency reset, followed by the introduction of the gold trade settlement. The return of the gold standard is near, and we can see that China is already pushing for this. At least 23 nations have already prepared for a new trade system that will occur outside the dollar and SWIFT systems. Through their moves away from the reliance on the dollar via the creation of new currency swap lines, major economic powers are transitioning away from the 42-year-old petrodollar system. Now, we see all the indicators out there. We see what is happening. And right now, what they're predicting, and this could be higher, because every time they give us a percentage, it is usually lower. Let's think back to Cyprus right now. They told us when they did their bank holiday, they closed all the banks down, the Cyprus people couldn't get their money. They said, listen, we're only going to take 8 to 10% of the people's money. That's all we're going to take. And it turned out they took 47% of their money. The IMF makes predictions saying things are going to be better, and they give us this high percentage saying that the economies are going to be better, and it's usually half. It's usually the opposite way. So right now, they are saying that the U.S. dollar is going to suffer a 30% devaluation sometime between February and March of this year. Now, the United States, we have to think about this for a second, has no gold. Most of the real estate in the United States has already been used for collateral for China and other countries. So we don't own that much at this point. The other thing is, we are losing the war in the Middle East and in Africa, in Thailand and Ukraine. We are losing ground. And once these nations, the people of these nations, push and push and push and move the central bankers and the U.S. government out of these countries, other countries will no longer need the U.S. dollar. So what happens? The value of this dollar is going to decrease. They're saying 30%. What happens if it's 40 or 50 or 60%? Because if we look at all the indicators, we are leading in that direction. Now, are we going to see this happen the next day this comes out? And of course, the president will probably come out, or one or two things will happen. The president will come out, and just like President Nixon came out saying, temporarily we're coming off the gold standard because of speculators, the president will come out with some type of an excuse of why this is happening. And he said, and in the beginning, we will not notice a change because all the goods and everything here in the United States are all in the United States. But what happens is when people start buying up the goods and they have to reorder more, this is when we're going to see the prices start to skyrocket. This is when you're going to see fuel skyrocket. This is when you're going to see food on the shelf skyrocket and other products skyrocket. So what this means is your ability to purchase has been downgraded by 30, 40, 50, 60%. So that gallon of milk that was $4 might be $15 at this point, but you might not see it until May or June, maybe April, depending on the time frame. We will have to definitely watch for this, and this is why we've been prepping. This is why you've been stocking up on food. This is why you've been stocking up on batteries. This is why you've been stocking up on toiletries. This is why you've been stocking up on gold and silver and keeping at least some cash in the house, because you know what's going to happen. A lot of people are going to have think about this. The day people see that things are skyrocketing, and all of a sudden, one day you see gas go up to $4.50, and a week later it's at $5.50. Milk was at $4.09, and now it's at $5.50. Next week it's at $6.50. People are going to start taking their money out, and they're going to start putting it into other places. And people are going to start getting scared because they will not understand what is going on. We saw inflation happen during the 70s. The only difference this time is that the incomes are not going to keep up with what is happening here, because the value of the dollar is being decreased, and we're seeing prices of the products increase, and there is nothing you can do about it at this time. This is why you need gold and silver to hedge yourself against this, and this is why you have to stock up on supplies right now so you can get through the time through this time period. And we can see what is occurring, we can see what is happening, and we all need to be prepared. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.